Under the floodlights at Anfield in March 1983, Liverpool were in desperate need of another one of those famous European nights. The reigning champions of England, who had been crowned as the European champions 3 times in the preceding 6 seasons, had lost 2-0 in the first leg of their quarter-final in Poland. A groan echoed around Anfield before the match kicked off when the team sheets were read out and Kenny Dalglish's name wasn't mentioned. Liverpool star man was suffering from an upset stomach. Without him, a still star-studded Liverpool side struggled to live with their well-organised and highly skillful opponents. Despite taking an early lead, Liverpool was soon pegged back before going 2-1 behind. 2 consolation goals late in the game resulted in victory on the night and a 4-3 defeat on aggregate, but in truth, that scoreline flattered Liverpool, who had been well and truly humbled. The Reds bounced back to defend their First Division title that season, and the following year, they won a 4th European Cup. But that night belonged to a crack side that most European football fans knew little about just a few years earlier. The team in question, RTS Widzew Łódź, weren't regulars in the European Cup. Founded in 1910, at a time when you wouldn't even have been able to find Poland on a map of Europe, because it didn't formally exist, I'm not just assuming that you're rubbish at geography, Widzew were a district team from the city of Łódź that competed in local lower league competitions all the way through to the late 1960s. That all changed under Ludwik Sobolewski, who became Widzew's club president in 1977, with the aim of making Widzew not just the best team in Łódź, but the finest in all of Poland. He realised that dream, as Widzew won back-to-back Ekstraklasa titles in 1981 and 1982, as well as making their mark in Europe by knocking Manchester United out of the 1980-81 UEFA Cup, and both Rapid Vienna and Liverpool en route to the semi-finals of the 1982-83 European Cup. Renowned for their fervent and unwavering support, Widzew were considered Poland's Cinderella club until 15 years ago, when disaster struck. In 2008, Widzew were found guilty as part of an enormous corruption scandal exposed by Polish authorities. They suffered 2 relegations, and in 2015, their multi-millionaire owner declared the club bankrupt. Unwilling to sit back and watch their club die, the interestingly named Red Army's famously loyal supporters decided to step in and intervene. They refounded the club, starting out with amateur status in the 5th tier of Polish football, sharing the same dream as Ludwik Sobolewski of one day guiding Widzew to greatness. 8 years and 4 promotions later, the club from Łódź sit 3rd in Poland's top flight, in contention to qualify for Europe this season, having defied all of the odds and smashed numerous attendance records along the way. So in today's video, I invite you all to sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to the Widzew district of Łódź, once home to a city within a city, as we take a look at the extraordinary story of a football club that continues to defy all of the odds, and not only refuses to die, but is actually thriving. The city of Łódź has had a tumultuous past. The 3rd largest city in Poland by population, behind only Warsaw and Krakow, Łódź has historically been much less known than those 2 outside of Poland, and indeed, a fair bit less glamorous. Granted town rights in 1423, during the era of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Łódź was first annexed by Prussia, then the Duchy of Warsaw, which was a client state of Napoleonic France, followed by Congress Poland, which was another client state of the Russian Empire. It was in the dying embers of Congress Poland, sometimes referred to as Russian Poland, and its century-long rule that Widzew Łódź were founded in 1910, becoming one of the earliest clubs in modern-day Poland. By this stage, Łódź had become a major industrial centre, with a rapidly growing population, particularly of Germans and Jews, employed in the textile industry. The city's industrial success, centred around textiles, and financed by several wealthy Englishmen, led to Łódź being nicknamed the Polish Manchester by some. Unlike Manchester though, the city's football clubs haven't historically enjoyed enormous success. Despite being Poland's third largest city now by population, Łódź is only Poland's sixth most successful city in footballing terms, trailing Krakow, Warsaw, Chorzów, Zabrze and Poznan, whose clubs have all won considerably more top-flight league titles. Founded as a works team by Polish workers and German industrialists, RTS Widzew textile manufacturer called WIMA, the RTS in Widzew's name stands for Workers' Sports Association in English. Because the club was founded at a time when Poland was under the rule of Tsarist Russia though, they were prohibited from using the word workers in their name. Instead, Widzew were founded as the Society of Physical Development Fans Widzew, which hardly rolls off the tongue in either English or Polish. Widzew hadn't been playing long when tumult hit not just Łódź once again, but this time the whole of Europe, with the outbreak of World War I. Poland still didn't exist at the time as a political entity, but it witnessed some of the bloodiest scenes of the entire conflict. In 1916, 2 million Polish soldiers were split between the Russian, German, and Austro-Hungarian armies of World War I, sustaining enormous losses in a conflict which resulted in the collapse of all three empires. Of those 2 million Polish soldiers, 1 in 4 had been killed and 2 in 4 had been injured or maimed when the conflict reached an end. The implementation of scorched earth tactics by all sides when retreating left Poland devastated by 1918 and much of the former war zone uninhabitable. Soldiers and civilians who survived the fighting often fell victim to malnutrition or disease instead, and the east of Poland in particular was ravaged by famine. The collapse of all three empires that had been fighting over Poland during World War I allowed for the Second Polish Republic to be formally declared on November 11, 1918, and in 1922, RTS Widzew Łódź were reactivated, this time with the word workers in their name. Admittedly, it would have been nice if they had been able to do that without all of the misery, destruction and death of World War I, but we'll try to take the small wins where we can get them. A small number of wins is exactly what the next couple of decades entailed for RTS, who competed only at the local level against other teams from the Łódź province. The city of Łódź is divided into 5 main districts, one of which is Widzew, the city's eastern industrial and residential area, and 56 sub-districts, and RTS were Widzew's biggest club. In 1926, they faced LKS Łódź for the first time from the residential district of Polesi, who went on to become the dominant team from the region, regulars in the Ekstraklasa, and later RTS's bitter rivals. World War II brought yet more tumult to Łódź, which was briefly renamed Litzmannstadt by the Germans in 1940, after the German World War I general turned Nazi Party member Karl Litzmann, who was best known for his victory as a commander of the German Ninth Army over the Russians at the 1914 Battle of Łódź. The city's large and thriving Jewish population that had grown throughout the Second Industrial Revolution was decimated by the Nazis, rounded up along with the local Roma population, and put to work at the Łódź ghetto before being transported to extermination camps and killed. When German forces first occupied Łódź, 230,000 of the city's 672,000 strong population, so over 30%, were Jewish. Consequently, the Łódź ghetto was the second largest in all of German-occupied Europe, behind only the Warsaw ghetto, and an estimated 210,000 Jews passed through it in total. When the Soviets liberated the ghetto, only 877 remained. It is believed that only around 10,000 Jewish residents of Łódź survived the Nazi occupation. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, in which a third of the city's population had been exterminated, as the Nazis put it, RTS reached the top flight of Polish football for the very first time. Promoted to what is now the Ekstraklasa in 1947, they were immediately relegated in last place, with only 13 points from 26 games in the 1948 season, and it would be 27 years before the club played top-flight football again. When they returned, however, in 1975, RTS would stick around for a little while longer. Ludwik Sobolewski transformed Widzew from local favourites to national icons, with a core of talented locals, complemented by some outstanding recruitment. The star of the side was undoubtedly Zbigniew Boniek, arguably Poland's greatest player of all time, and failing that, certainly their second greatest, behind only Kazimierz Dyna. Best known for his starring role at the 1982 World Cup, which saw him make the All-Star team and finish third in Ballon d'Or voting, and for his 6 seasons playing Serie A football for Juventus and Roma, Boniek played more games for Widzew than any other club. Described by Diego Maradona as the best counter-attacking player in the world, Boniek was often the top scorer from midfield, in a Widzew side that didn't score a huge number of goals, but also rarely conceded. Having finished as top-flight runners-up in 1976-77, 1978-79, and 1979-80, Widzew were finally crowned as champions of Polish football for the first time in the 1980-81 season, which they followed up with a second successive title in 1981-82. 4 of the Poland starting 11 that finished third at the 1982 World Cup played their club football for Widzew Łódź, including their captain Władysław Zmuda, as well as their starman Boniek. Both Zmuda and Boniek left Widzew that summer, yet they still managed to reach the semi-finals of the European Cup the following season, famously beating Liverpool, and they only missed out on a third successive league title by virtue of a solitary point to Lech Poznan. They came even closer the following season in 1983-84, this time actually finishing level on points with Lech and missing out only by virtue of goal difference. As communism began to fall and the PZPR introduced a series of liberal reforms in Poland during the mid-1980s, Poland's best players fled the country en masse. Widzew were no exception, and as one of the division's best teams, they would feel those losses particularly hard. Unlike a lot of the former Eastern Bloc countries, you will find very little communist nostalgia in Poland, but there can be no doubt that, like most former communist countries, the fall of communism was bad for Polish football. Star players left, funding dried up, stadiums began to crumble, and the overall standard of the domestic league pyramid and the national team began to decline. Despite finishing third at the 1982 World Cup and qualifying for their 4th successive FIFA World Cup finals in 1986, it wasn't until 2002 that Poland next qualified for the biggest tournament in all of world football. Polish club sides, similarly, ceased to be a force to be reckoned with in European competitions almost overnight, whereas a trip to Poland pretty much guaranteed you a tough matchup for almost any team during the 1970s and 80s. By the 1990s, Polish teams became cannon fodder for any top European side. No team illustrated that fact better than Widzew, who went from knocking Manchester United and Liverpool out of Europe in 1981 and 1983 to suffering one of the heaviest defeats in the history of European football against Eintracht Frankfurt in 1992, just a decade later, or less than a decade, in the case of the Liverpool game, when they lost 9-0 in the first round. Though their hopes of competing for major European honours may have been scuppered, Widzew continued to compete domestically, and in 1995-96, they completed one of the greatest seasons in the history of Polish football. Scoring 84 goals and conceding only 22 across a 34-game campaign, Widzew went invincible, picking up 88 points to clinch the title, narrowly ahead of an outstanding Legia Warsaw side. Poland goalkeeper Andrzej Woźniak, signed by Widzew from their great rivals LKS, was arguably the team's star man, and the following season, they won the title again. Woźniak is now back at RTS, working as a goalkeeping coach. They even managed to restore some pride in Europe, overcoming Brøndby to qualify for the Champions League group stage, where they drew with Borussia Dortmund and beat Steaua Bucharest. And the following year, they won 1-0 against Udinese in the UEFA Cup before going out on aggregate. In the 1998-99 season, Widzew even qualified for the Champions League, despite finishing second due to Wisła Kraków receiving a 12-month European ban, but that seeming positive belied a darker truth and future for Polish football. Wisła had been banned from Europe after one of their ultras threw a knife, which struck Parma player Dino Baggio in the head, and the creeping scourge of hooliganism and violence, combined with increased well-founded accusations of corruption, saw dwindling crowds and a significant decline in interest in Polish football. No one was spared, but some teams fared worse than others, and Widzew Łódź were relegated in last place in 2004. In 2006, they bounced back, narrowly avoiding relegation in their first season back in the top flight, as Arka Gdynia and Górnik Weldna were relegated 1 and 2 divisions respectively, as part of a major corruption scandal. In the summer of 2007, Widzew were bought out by Polish entrepreneur Sylwester Kaczek. Less than a year earlier, Kaczek had sold his 51% stake in Dominet Bank to Belgian firm Fortis for a fee of 500 million zloty, or roughly £90 million, making him one of the richest people in Poland. Though there was some excitement about his arrival, it never seemed like a great fit, and so it proved. Łódź has always been a city of great contrast and inequality, owing to its industrial legacy, a time when luxurious mansions home to foreign factory owners and merchants would occupy the same street corners as red brick factories, and dilapidated tenement flat blocks housing the workers who staffed those very same factories. Widzew is a club that was founded by workers though, for workers, with the word initially excluded from their name, and their rise heralded as a remarkable Cinderella story, rather than one rendered inevitable by the backing of a super-rich benefactor. Kaczek's task wasn't made any easier when, halfway through his first season at the club, Widzew were also implicated in that enormous corruption scandal, found to have bribed referees on at least 12 occasions before his arrival between 2003 to 2005, and punished by the PZPN with relegation. Kaczek appealed the decision, but in his debut campaign, Widzew were relegated regardless. The initial judgment stated that, should the club finish within the relegation zone, as they did, they would be relegated 2 divisions in order for a punishment still to be exacted. But Widzew's appeal meant that the club was initially only relegated once to Poland's newly rebranded second tier, known as the First Liga. Widzew were crowned as First Liga champions the following season, but they lost their appeal. Instead of relegating them again, the PZPN decided that simply denying the club promotion despite having been crowned as second-tier champions would be an adequate punishment. The following season, Widzew won the league again, and this time they would be promoted. Polish football's corruption scandal had undermined virtually any remaining faith in the league, with so many clubs, referees, and officials having been implicated. For Widzew, though, it was existential. Throughout all of this tumultuousness, Sylwester Kaczek had pursued a very cosmopolitan transfer strategy, recruiting obscure players from all over the globe, some becoming big hits, and many more severe flops. Widzew also continued to go through managers like you wouldn't believe. Between the year 2000 and 2010, a period of 10 years, as the more seasoned mathematicians among you will have been able to gather without my help there, RTS went through 22 different managers. Even Gino Pozzo at Watford would look at that and say, alright, calm down lads, it's not a competition. Mid-table finishes in 2010-11 and 2011-12 were followed by a near miss in 2012-13, as Widzew finished just 2 points above the drop, but that only delayed the inevitable. In the 2013-14 season, crippling under the financial weight of Kaczek's poor decisions, combined with the legacy of their corruption punishments, Widzew dropped out of the top flight once again, and the following season, they suffered a second successive relegation after finishing bottom of the First Liga. Angered at the mismanagement of the club, and owing to disagreements with the board, some fanatical Widzew supporters founded TMRF Widzew Łódź, invoking the club's original name in the 8th tier of Polish football, which is the lowest level of the country's pyramid. With only RTS supporters playing for them, TMRF managed to win the Łódź first group of Klasa B title in their debut campaign, securing promotion to the 7th tier in 2015. By contrast, at the end of RTS's disastrous campaign in 2015, Sylwester Kaczek announced that the club had been declared bankrupt and was to be dissolved. Unwilling to sit back and watch whilst their club died, Widzew fans, led by local businessmen Marcin Ferdzin and Grzegorz Woronecki, founded the Association of the Reactivation of the Sports Traditions of Widzew Łódź. Not content with simply creating a Phoenix club, as some fans already had in the case of TMRF Widzew Łódź in 2013, Widzew supporters wanted to ensure that RTS Widzew Łódź's legacy wouldn't be lost in time. In mid-July 2015, they successfully appealed to the PZPN to be recognised as the uninterrupted continuation of Widzew Łódź, despite the club's economic collapse. Widzew's club mottos are "Together we create power" and "Always 12", the latter referring to their supporters acting as the club's 12th man on the pitch. That took on a whole new meaning in 2015. Club legend Zbigniew Boniek, who was actually a co-owner and board member when Widzew's troubles first began in the mid to late 2000s, famously once said that, quote, "Widzew can be bent, but it cannot be broken." That theory was tested to the extreme in 2015, but it proved to be an eternal truism. If there are three things that will survive the next apocalypse, they might just be cockroaches, scorpions, and RTF Widzew Łódź. Although, I'm not exactly sure who they'll play against. Though Widzew were starting out in the 5th tier of Polish football, somewhat confusingly named the 4th Liga, locals rallied around the club. The departure of Kaczek, fan ownership, and the general sense of rebirth led to an enormous emotional investment and to massive crowds. Widzew's stadium, which is nicknamed the Heart of Łódź, was over 70 years old. As far back as the 1950s and 60s, Widzew were forced to play games at the homes of their rivals LKS, since their own ground didn't meet second-tier standards. And it was only in the 1970s when activists and supporters volunteered to renovate the stadium by hand that Widzew had a home fit for top-flight football. The capacity was raised to 20,000, but by 2014, the Widzew Stadion remained virtually untouched since the 70s. It was falling into a state of disrepair, and the capacity had been reduced to 10,500. Hopes of a new ground, as part of Poland's successful bid to jointly host Euro 2012 with Ukraine, were scuppered when Łódź was overlooked in favour of other cities. Council funding for a new ground on the site of the old one was granted in 2014, but it looked to be under real threat following bankruptcy in 2015. Widzew fans were convinced, though, that despite starting out in the 5th tier, they would plough on with the project and decided against reducing the planned 18,008 capacity. There was a great deal of scepticism at the time, and for good reason. 5th tier teams in Poland building 1st tier stadia tends to be a recipe for disaster, but Widzew aren't most clubs. When the stadium opened in March 2017, a crowd of 17,443 packed in to watch a 4th tier fixture between Widzew and Motol Obawa. It was the highest attendance in all of Polish football that weekend, and it wasn't to be a one-off. Widzew sold 10,000 half-season tickets for the remainder of the campaign, in which they won promotion to the 3rd tier, which the club claimed to be the second highest at that level of European football, behind Rangers in the 2012-13 season, and following promotion, that figure rose to 12,000. Widzew's state-of-the-art new UEFA Category 3 ground was complete with a gym, a restaurant, 29 boxes, a superstore, and a museum dedicated to the club's storied past. It provided the financial engine room for Widzew's incredible rise up through the divisions, and there are already calls for the capacity to be further increased. With an average attendance of 17,119 so far this season, Widzew are running pretty much at maximum capacity, and with expansion, it's hoped that they could overtake Legia Warsaw as the best supported club in Poland. The club from the capital currently average just over 20,000 in a stadium that can accommodate 31,000 fans. Since the club's rebirth in 2015, RTS have spent a total of 1.1 million zloty, or just €235,000, on player signings. All of the funding that has fueled their rise has been raised either through the sale of tickets and merchandise or fundraising campaigns. An organisation called WOWP was founded in 2013 with that specific purpose in mind, which is still going strong, now sponsors the club's academy, where a lot of the focus has been put since 2015, and most recently transferred 35,000 zloty raised by fans to the club in October 2022. TMRF Widzew Łódź, founded by disgruntled RTS fans, feuding with the club's board in 2013, became Widzew's reserve team in 2016. Widzew has long been a community club, but it is now rooted in the city of Łódź, which is looking for its own rebirth, more so than ever. The club is at the heart of social projects, and fans still frequently volunteer to help with those projects and with the day-to-day running of the club. Widzew now have an amputee team alongside their men's, women's, youth reserve and basketball teams, among others. You may be very fleetingly familiar with amputee football in Poland, as Marcin Oleksy recently won the 2002 FIFA Puskás Award whilst competing in the same league as Widzew for his extraordinary overhead kick. Widzew are currently third in the Ekstraklasa, in contention to qualify for Europe and to record their highest league finish since the 1990s. From where they were in 2015, it is a scarcely conceivable achievement. Polish football is turbulent, still troubled by strains of hooliganism, and is not of a particularly high standard. Currently, the Ekstraklasa ranks 27th in UEFA's league coefficients, 6 places below Cyprus, and only 2 above Azerbaijan. But it is also incredibly competitive and entertaining. Widzew Łódź have been a fine example of the good, the bad, and indeed the ugly sides of Polish football at various stages over the last 40 years. But now they represent something more universal, an unwavering resilience, spirit, and solidarity in a country where the last of those 3 holds particular significance. That is it for today's video. Thank you all very much as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it, or just, feel bad about how long I spent with those Polish pronunciations, and no doubt still absolutely massacred them all, but, no one can say I didn't try my best. Like I say, hit the like button, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure, of course, that you are subscribed, both to HITC Sevens and my backup channel, both of which should be on your screen now, and have notifications turned on. You can also find me on Twitter and on Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.